Retrograde Planets and Eclipses in Astrology, a brief video created, directed, and presented by Reverend Dr. Dickie Joe Mullen. In this video, Dr. Mullen will provide an overview of the effects of retrograde planets and eclipses in regard to your astrological chart.
This is astrologer Dickie Joe Mullen with a look at retrogrades and eclipses. In astrology, things go in cycles. You know, in your own life, sometimes your luck changes, and you can't quite understand why. That's what astrology is all about. It's a science of time and space. Most people are aware of the full moon. Everything goes kind of loony then, as the saying goes. It's where the phrase lunatic comes from. And another phrase that many people know about that are vaguely interested in astrology is retrograde Mercury. Retrograde Mercury I hear mentioned so often in conversation and in passing as an excuse as to why things aren't the way we expect, which usually is why there are problems. Just people and places aren't what we're anticipating. Retrograde motion is the illusion of a planet moving backward. Now, the sun and moon can't go retrograde unless they're in mutual reception. That's something else with a retrograde planet. But it's the planets from Mercury out. And this is created by the Earth's speed relative to that of the other planets. Astrologically, retrogrades are extremely significant. They promise a change of pace, different paths, and different perspectives. The planet, of course, doesn't really put on the brakes and go in reverse, but it just acts like it does. Retrograde Mercury takes place for about 21 days, 3 to 4 times a year, and it impacts technology, travel, and communication. Those who've been out of touch will return. It's a good time to complete old projects. Think of all of the prefixes that begin with RE. Revise, review, reconnect, remember. Tread familiar paths. Don't begin a new job unless you want it to be temporary. Don't move unless you want it to come back again. Those that are born under the Mercury-ruled signs of Gemini and Virgo, or who have those signs as an ascendant, will be especially impacted by the retrograde Mercury. And you can look on my website, Sky Maiden Musings, for a list of the specific dates when Mercury or any of the other planets are retrograde for the current year. Venus retrograde is the rarest of the retrogrades. If you've heard of retrograde Mercury, I will bet you, what would I like to bet? A bag of maple ice donuts. That's what I'll bet. That you haven't heard of retrograde Venus, but I'll take retrograde Mercury any day of the week over retrograde Venus. Venus retrograde doesn't happen very often. It's less than once a year. It's about 41 days, and it especially affects those born under the Venus-ruled signs of Libra or Taurus, but it's very negative for manners and relationships. Don't change your marital status, whatever it might be. Either getting divorced or married under the retrograde Venus is unfavorable. But Venus is also money. It's not the best time to start a business. And anything to do with social events, keep a sense of humor if you're giving a formal party and someone turns up in bowling shoes, because it just seems as if manners are out of sync a bit. And humor and laughter helps. As far as the arts go, there's no accounting for taste. Somebody might redo a house and think it looks beautiful, and everybody else who visits it might just have to really stifle a laugh or a gasp of horror at how it's turned out. So creativity, manners, relationships, and money to an extent kind of go haywire under a retrograde Venus. Retrograde Mars is about once a year. It's a 72-day cycle or so. Mars, of course, is the lord of war in mythology, and retrograde Mars affects the military, also sports, and heavy industry. The aggressor always loses on a retrograde Mars. If anyone doesn't believe in astrology or retrogrades, just look at traditional dates when Mars has gone retrograde and look to see who's invading and whatever wars are going around on the planet. And they always will lose if Mars is retrograde. This isn't a good time to push yourself too hard with a workout program. Isn't a good time to tell anyone off. Remember, the aggressor always loses. And heavy industry, take extra safety precautions during this time period. The Mars-ruled signs of Aries and Scorpio will be affected by the retrograde. Jupiter goes retrograde about once a year for about 121 days. Large animals, speculation of any type, education and religion are impacted. Now, retrogrades aren't always negative. They just show sort of a different direction or different slant on things. And in esoteric or spiritual astrology, they're extremely important. The Jupiter retrograde will affect Sagittarius and Pisces people. Those signs are especially affected or have a special link with the Jupiter rulership. Saturn retrograde is going to affect Capricorn and Aquarius people, or those with that ascendant. And overall, elderly people, the disadvantaged, situations relating to natural resources and employment will be impacted by the retrograde Saturn. Retrograde Uranus especially impacts Aquarius people or Aquarius rising, and it has to do with electronics, revolutionaries, extreme weather, inventions, and science. As we're recording this, there have been a lot of controversies over computer hacking and also some very wild and extreme weather. And Uranus retrograde has just ended as we're recording the tape today, and the last several weeks, which are the late part of 2016, there's just been a tremendous amount of impact in the world over the retrograde Uranus that's been taking place. Retrograde Neptune. Neptune is the sea god. This relates to the zodiac sign of Pisces. Water, aquatic creatures, chemicals, and also spiritual forces and psychic phenomena are impacted by the Neptune retrograde. I get many calls to bless haunted houses and dispel negative energy, do smudging when Neptune is retrograde, for example. Neptune is retrograde for about 158 days at a time. The further away a planet is from the sun, the longer the retrograde period. Pluto retrograde relates to espionage, ecology, birth and death rates, nuclear power, unexplained mysteries, the crime rate. Pluto goes retrograde for about 160 days at a time, and it especially will impact Scorpio people. Eclipses are another pattern that are really good to be aware of as far as world trends and events. Eclipses are close alignments of the sun, moon, and earth. There can either be a lunar eclipse at the time of the full moon or a solar eclipse at the time of the new moon. In a lunar eclipse, the shadow of the earth makes the moon disappear, and at a solar eclipse, the sun seems to disappear because of the shadow of the moon passing. In earlier times, it was thought that monsters were eating a luminary, and people would panic and do all sorts of rituals, and then eventually the luminary would move and come back, and the light would be normal again. In today's world, we tend to be a little more scientific than that, but the eclipses are extremely significant. They represent a strong magnetic pole of the sun, moon, and earth all lined up together. There are total eclipses where the sun or the moon would be totally blocked, and then there are partial ones. The partial ones are less intense, but we still feel them. The moon's nodes affect eclipses, and the north node of the moon, the north nodes are intersection points between the moon's orbit and the plane of the Earth's orbit. There's a north and a south node. The south node is considered to be more turbulent. So check to see if there's an eclipse. They usually get a lot of press in the news because they're great to look at and watch. And if there's a local planetarium near you, they'll often have the telescopes out, and it's a lot of fun to go and watch the eclipse taking place, and then look to see what's going on in the world. And anyone who doesn't believe in astrology yet surely will if you try that little exercise. The 2-week period between eclipses is a time of great change. Eclipses usually occur in pairs, one at a new moon and then one at the next full moon, or vice versa. Sometimes there can be 3 in a row, as far as there being a full, and then a new moon, or the other way around. But remember, they always coincide with either new or full moons. If you have an eclipse within 3 days of your birthday, you'll have a very exciting year. If you haven't been planning to move or change jobs, you probably will. And nothing is the same anymore. Now, don't panic if you notice there's an eclipse near your birthday this year. Think of it like a lifeguard telling you how to swim in a rip tide. Go with the flow, and you'll end up further down the beach, but swim against it and down you go. Never resist change when there's an eclipse affecting an important point in your birth chart. If you know your horoscope, you can look at the sign of the eclipse. It's either the sun or the moon sign taking place, and then look to see how that affects your own planets. If it affects, say, Mercury in your birth chart, there can be a change in your state of mind or communicating. Jupiter, a change in philosophy of life or how you're growing, and so forth. But the most significant eclipses are those that are within 3 days of your birthday. And everything goes topsy-turvy and changes. Hold on for the ride and enjoy the variety is all you can do with an eclipse, because again, it's a celestial tide of change and change of pace. I hope you've enjoyed this little study of eclipses and retrogrades. They're easy to understand and use, and will give you a lot of insight into your own life and the pattern of the world around you, how to cope with and understand the celestial cycles, which is what the science of astrology is all about. This is astrologer Dickie Jo Mullen wishing you a bright and happy year ahead. A year of happy eclipses and retrogrades.